Good. So I said I'd send some extra information about upcoming webinars. Feel free to share those widely, though, with others. I'm really glad I had the backup plan for the link, though. It looks like everybody got here much faster than I could have. Liz, what's the next? Where do you want to go next with this one?
We can loop back around to the assessment study, or we can jump back to, we had a couple more on the first round of questions, like if schools are interested, like how may their institutions like work with you and reach out to you to kind of advance their community engagement goals. Like what would that look like?
I see that Jackie has a question from Lynchburg, and if you want to unmute, you're more than welcome. I'm happy to do popcorn and just go, oh, you don't have a micro. Okay, just type your question then. And while you're typing, I will, I'll briefly mention the alumni study because I think it's important. By the way, my methodology on the alumni study was also interesting. The survey itself asked whether or not students did community service or not, did they take a service learning course or not, and those sorts of things. I took a different approach on how I wanted to figure out who to interview. So there was a question in there that asked, how well did IUPUI prepare you for, and it was about 7 bullet point items. And about 4 of those 7 items were things, are learning outcomes that we would associate with engaged learning experiences. So things like working with diverse others, you know, understanding real world problems, that kind of stuff, okay? So I selected 4 of those, and I didn't want to interview everyone from those. I only wanted to look at the outliers. So those that said IUPUI very well prepared or not well prepared. So that's my sample of who I looked at. And I did it mostly because this was going to like a ridiculous number of people, and I was overwhelmed at first of what I might get. And I've had a really interesting response rate from that. Logistical nightmare, PS, by the way, of scheduling meetings, but I've been on Zoom a lot recording stuff. So here's what my biggest takeaways for you from those is that, number one, I've had one person mention the word service learning. They don't think about it in that way. Very much aligned with the Gallup poll. If any of you have recently seen a Gallup poll of 30,000 undergraduates, the most compelling thing the reason they say that that was important to them was a faculty or staff member cared about them. Someone cared. And like, I'll even say that they did one of 2 things. They could actually, and to interview alumni, keep in mind, these are people 3 to 5 years out. The recall on that likelihood of them being able to name a person is shocking. And these people could name a person, some of whom have retired or whatever, but I could, you know, they could tell me who, there was 1 or 2 people that were really influential to them. They remembered their names, and they could describe how they were unique compared to other people on campus. And their unique attributes, beyond the fact that they cared for them, was that they facilitated meaningful dialogue. These faculty members may not, I know some of them, they're not necessarily teaching service learning courses or even engaged learning courses. They're a faculty member in religious studies, or they teach in ethics in informatics. They're people who can bring up difficult conversations and facilitate it in a way that just probed their thinking, sparked their interest, and got them going. So that may be disappointing for those of us who are advocates of community engagement. They don't all talk about like, oh, I went and did this service experience and did these hours in this community or whatever. So I think that's interesting, but probably not surprising and aligns with faculty, other alumni studies that we have seen. And then I would say that they're coming out into 4 different themes, 4 different types of students, 4 different types of alumni. Category 1 is students who do direct service. These are people who I would say if you ask them, so one of the questions I asked them to identify a social issue that they care about and how they work and engage that social issue. P.S. I've had the most meaningful dialogues about most critical issues in our society these days in an hour with complete strangers. It's been amazing. And loved every minute of it. And they have too. They've been like, I was really dreading this interview, but I love talking to you. This was amazing. I'm so glad you do this work. So there's value, I think, also in institutions interviewing their alumni. Several of them I've referred to graduate school. I think they're all going to come back to grad school now. So the direct service ones, they are the kind that will like They'll do a Race for the Cure walk. They'll volunteer at their soup kitchen. They do stuff through their church. They're periodic, episodic volunteer kind of people. They care, but it's not like, you know, they may donate to causes, that kind of thing. Category number 2 is what we would call civic-minded professionals. These are people who are thinking about the thing that they care about in the world. They have chosen a career or profession that allows them to do that. So they are, even if you're a dentist, right? They care about dentists and kids with disabilities and how they handle being in the dentist chair. So I have a dentist who works with children with autism. He's doing a specialty in pediatrics to work with kids with special needs. So it's not just dentistry, right? He cares about a specific population and engaging with those through his profession. Social workers, nurses. I interviewed a nurse who, in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, who had just been a clinical nurse. She felt so compelled about women's rights. She stopped her job at the clinical floor and went and worked for Planned Parenthood as a supervisor. So these are people who see their role as a professional. My job is to contribute to meaningful ways in society. Category number 3 are people who I would say are thinking about this on a systemic level. So they're like systemic change agents. These are ones who aren't necessarily addressing the issue perhaps not addressing the issue on a day-to-day basis in their everyday lives, but they've marched on Washington. They've testified to legislators. They write their legislators. They are actively involved on a local, national, or international level around policies, and they have a very complex understanding of the root causes of the wicked problems in our society. And category 4 is a combination of 2 and 3. They are not mutually exclusive people, but we are seeing that there are some who both are a social worker, but are also actively involved in their industry or professional association and are thinking about policy. So a dentist who holds a leadership role within the National Dentistry Association and is advocating for how healthcare covers dental coverage. So I'm not just a dentist, right? I am thinking legislatively, policy, advocating, that kind of thing. An engineer who's involved in their engineering association around unions and federal laws and workforce development and how they can get a more skilled workforce coming through. So any discipline. And just like you probably would imagine, STEM fields are less likely to fall into categories 2 and 4 than the social sciences. All right, I'm gonna go back to the chat now, if that's okay, Liz, since there was a question in there about that. And I'm happy to answer anything else you have about alumni, but those are the key things that are coming out. As a faculty fellow, I'd like to learn at least 1 or 2 assessment strategies that are simple and work well in order to gather data that will be very valuable for the university. Oh, that's fun. By the way, I regret that it is true what you said. In pursuing my tenure, the university will value peer-reviewed work on my field of expertise, but not so much about your community engaged work. This needs to change. I totally agree. And I would say John Saltmarsh's white paper, those research briefs they did are really great for you to present. John's name alone is reputation in the field. And he's putting them in the scholarsnetwork.org. And if I can't get them, I will also send those to you, Liz, if we can't find them on a link. He's recently been presenting them at conferences. I think he's going to be at the National Campus Compact Conference next month to present on them. He's looking for feedback. So they're still in a draft form, but he's open to getting feedback. And I think Collaboratory is going to host a webinar about some of that work. Okay, so I don't have enough time to go into how institutions can gather evidence of community engagement at the institution level. We are systematically woefully underprepared to best understand what that looks like. And it's the reason we're doing these larger webinars. So IUPUI, I'll start here. How's this? I think institutions need to first define what they mean that students will know and be able to do. Like come up with a civic goal. At IUPUI, we recently called them community contributor. And I may be able to pull up something that is very helpful for you. So assessment people can't help you because you guys, us as institutions, have not defined what it is that we mean by that, and therefore they can't help you assess it. Hang on, guys, I'm trying to find a website. Do you need something? Are you good? Okay. Sorry, my husband is doing something. Holding. Okay. I'm going to share my screen here in a second. Can you now see? I don't know how to make that smaller so it all fits into one screen. Zoom down. Oh, there we go. Look at me navigating. So IUPUI recently reframed our campus level learning outcomes. By the way, not all institutions actually even have institution-wide learning outcomes, which scares the crap out of me for any of you going up for accreditation. So number one priority, define your learning outcomes. You'll notice we don't call it civic-minded graduates, but community contributor down here in the right-hand corner we just rechanged these, by the way, to change it to active. What do our stakeholders and industry professionals call it? They don't call it civic-minded graduates. I have to explain what that means to people in our field, much less to business leaders and everyone else. So we need to use language that is the lay public understands and not academic speak when we're talking about what students need to know and be able to do. So yes, communication. So do you see how it's innovator, communicator, problem solver, and community contributor? They're all basic. Problem solver, by the way, was critical thinking, integration of knowledge. It used to be things that were so academic language that no one could ever figure out. This document is available online. We actually define what it means to be a community contributor. There are ideas for what it means to be a community, to build community, to behave ethically. You can kind of see as I scroll down this page, you can actually access this whole report online and be able to look at it. So first and foremost, I guess strategy is we need to define what it is that we mean and what that might look like. Once you've done that, then we can begin to do mapping of engagement. So my other next step that I think is really important is to figure out where does this learning happen? And based on the alumni study and everything else I saw in my current job, it's not just happening in service learning courses. You understand what it means to be a community contributor in a variety of learning experiences, and we need to know where those occur across our institutions. So we need to do some mapping work, and there's some great literature out of NILOA, the National Institute for Learning Outcomes and Assessment. If you don't know about NILOA, you need to sign up for their listserv. They do great little like occasional papers. They're like 2 to 3 pages. They're like aha moments for everybody. They've got some really great work around equity, culturally relevant assessment for students. Somebody wants the link. I'm going to provide this link. Hopefully it will help you in the box. And I'll definitely pass it on to Liz afterwards as well. So all of those are to say that that's not a simple strategy. That I guess the sad part of what I'm saying is that we've got to really get behind our institutions and sort of think about what this means. They're changing the Higher Learning Commission. I'm an HLC campus, and I'm on a panel at the April conference for HLC. I was asked to come and talk about some of this work. We really, if we could just get you to say what you mean, define it, and map it, we'd be like in way better shape. There are so many assessment tools out there, like rubrics and instruments. I don't even know what to recommend because I don't know what you mean when you say civic outcomes. And what's going to be realistic to assess in a 16-week service learning course is very different than a capstone experience versus an exit survey for graduates. So I don't know if I can help you too much yet. Other than we're doing some 4-hour workshops for faculty at various conferences and some of these webinars that I think would be helpful.
Question, what do you think about Acing Use Rubric? I mean, used generically to assess that. Okay.
It's too high level, it's too convoluted. So if you're assessing a student's e-portfolio, like their whole culminating thing, it's okay. I don't think we've asked for the right artifacts within those courses and experiences in order for us to actually see the evidence that we would need to apply that rubric to it. I worked on the Civic-Minded Graduate Rubric 2.0, and we did look at the civic engagement, Acing Use Civic Engagement Rubric, and had pieces of it. Let me see if I can pull something up like that for you guys. IUPUI. I'm going to post this link in the chat room as well. And this will take you to something I think that is much more helpful than the Acing Use Value rubric for helping. Okay. Share my screen. It's really good that I'm proficient at moving quickly in these things. So this is available free online for anybody to use. Framing, glossary of terms, notes about the rubric. I think you'll see that we think that institutions, when I say institution-wide and then break it down, this says civic mindedness, but put community contributor in there if you want in terms of the construct right there. And then within the domains, we've broken it down to say some of you might just be focused on a civic identity. Some of them it's about working with diverse others. Some of them it's about how to understand the issues that are addressed in society. And when I say I think you need to map where students have these learning opportunities, I mean, where do students have development orientation for social change on campus, both in a curricular and co-curricular experiences? You need to map where those experiences are occurring. And then if you were to scroll down on this, this is never meant to be used all at once. But if you said my course or program is meant to help students develop an orientation towards social change, there's 2 rows of a rubric that you could use to help you measure the outcomes that you see in your students. Does that make sense? And there's language in there. A lot of the civic identity one comes from a couple of the Acing Use Value rubrics, things like perspective taking and being openness and curiosity and questioning. So does that answer a simpler question for that? Okay. And it's free. There's a civic-minded graduate survey instrument as well as one for civic-minded professionals for graduate programs if you needed something.
This rubric was developed by IUPUI.
Yeah, myself, Tom Hahn, and Ann Weiss. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we have about 10 minutes left, so I think we should just open it up to questions.
Yeah.
For other people.
I'll tell you about community impact if you want. No, student learning. We can focus on student learning. I won't go there if you don't want to.
I saw some head nods, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I should simplify my job to tell you that I don't sit around and do research and assessment all day. My real job, full-time thing is I just track who does what, where, with whom, and for what purpose. So if my day-to-day job is just figuring out what the heck the university is doing to address opioid abuse, down to like climate change, to understanding race relations in our community, like you name a social issue, it's my job to track it. I'm particularly interested when you do that with community. But sometimes you can't call with community. So I have a faculty member in science who does amazing things on air quality. He can't name a community partner. He studies air. For a really long time, my work has ignored his work. He does amazing community engaged work. He shut down like 7 parks in Indianapolis because of lead soil testing. But he didn't do it with a community partner, right? He just collects soil from 300 people's houses across the state of Indiana. So when you asked him to tell you who his partners were as our normal course counting process that we always freaking hate to do. I'm really good at counting beans. That's all we got good at. You know, we were dismissing of what is it that we're actually doing to address a social issue. When we start with asking what are we doing to address social issues and when students are involved, what does that role look like? Are they in a course? Are they in a program? Are they doing undergraduate research? We can better understand what the institution is doing, and we have a more robust story about how that type of experience influences student learning and success. But when we just want to count courses, we are woefully underprepared to be able to do those things. I'm a public health faculty, and in my area we can have plenty of community service, but I'm new to community engagement. I'd like to know if anyone of faculty members who does plenty of health-related community engagement. Yeah, I have our School of Public Health is phenomenal. They are a go-to source on addressing infant mortality, which is a huge issue in the state of Indiana. Health disparities across the city, you know, wealthier areas. They've done a huge study there. They're working right now on changing smoking and the vaping laws. So they do a lot of policy work. So again, air pollution, any of these topics that I mentioned, I could tell you, maybe I should show you. my website. I have a whole way of showing everything that everybody does at any point in time. Anyone at IUPUI can search, what are we doing around STEM education? If you look at I'll share my screen. Let me go back, share screen. Our website, the Office of Community Engagement, we have this wonderful tab called Partner with Us. By the way, that's me on there. I have a couple of things that I would highlight in terms of thinking about community impact that is useful for you. So first and foremost, we use Collaboratory, not to sell you on a tool, but it's a licensed product that University of North Carolina, Greensboro, myself, several of us are using that's how I track who does what, where, with whom, and for what purpose. It allows me to track research, engagement, courses, blah, 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 you name it. Sorry, I don't need to go there. So then I engage the engagement map. We use the Collaboratory to track who does what, where, with whom, and for what purpose to create a map of our engagement. So now I'm able to understand any social issue, and I can add filters. What are we doing in those areas? And when I click on one of those areas, I can also show you everywhere else that the School of Informatics is engaged, who else they're partnering with. It's a very complicated map. It's better if I sort and filter it. So I could search and filter this by education and third grade literacy rates, and I'll know where are the worst third grade literacy rates in the city of Indianapolis, and where do we have partnerships. So is our engagement addressing the things that we said we needed to be caring about, or where are we not engaged?
Who enters this data in the Collaboratory?
Collaboratory data is entered in two different ways, one of which is that faculty and staff can enter it directly on their own, but that's a nightmare. We all know faculty aren't going to do that. No offense to anyone on this call that's a faculty member. So it has a proxy function that allows a student in my office, 99% of what's in my Collaboratory, this is it, it's publicly searchable, I just went to it. If I logged in, I can show you stuff on the back end, but I won't do that for right now. I have a student who proxies information on behalf of a faculty member. So I get data sets, or I go interview a faculty member and a student comes with me, and they go back to their office and they enter their 4 projects. I'll just leave STEM in there and see what I get. I have 42 activities at my institution around STEM. And if I were to click on any of these, I can get more information about who does these Center for these weather camps, and I can show you where we go and who we partner with, who the contact person is. If there's a course associated with it, I can find that out, who they collaborate with, other faculty, other units on campus. And then I can even go to like, okay, so let's see everything that the Center for the Earth and Environmental Science does. So it's a highly relational database that at any point in time is updated. So it's live, publicly searchable, publicly updatable, and if any point I want to figure out what's going on, that's sort of my go-to spot for figuring those things out. It is the foundational piece that allows me to leverage other sources of information at the institution, such as our student affairs database of where students do engagement service hours. I can leverage our course counting process and where faculty are partnering with courses. We have an IRB protocol that says, are you doing community engaged research? I get notifications of those. So I can enter. And so it allows me to follow the breadcrumbs. None of it tells me everything, but there are multiple sources at my institution about where I can read a press release from or a blog post, or I was in a meeting and I heard about a faculty member doing some amazing work, and I can Google them, search them, and then I find out more information and enter it into Collaboratory. And then we have an engagement directory that we just started that I have a listing of every faculty member that's in Collaboratory, and I can click on their profile and you can see all the work that they're doing. So Sylvia Bugatti in particular does really cool work with Latino population. So if I'd searched Latino, she would have come up as one of the faculty members that we talk about. So she runs a summer camp for Latino populations. And on the back end, I track her scholarship. It tracks publications, all kinds of other things on the back end. So in terms of developing evidence for faculty to do engaged work, I have documentation of both relationships as well as products. So process and products. Does that make sense? And then the last thing I would say about these other stories, about stories of impact, I don't create these. My community engagement, our marketing person does, but she leverages the map and this ArcGIS tool, so overlays it with other social media things. And if I scroll down, we sort of begin to now tell a story about what we're doing in the Near East Side. some context, poverty rates, that kind of thing. Here's what we're doing about health. And you'll see it's populating from the map and only sorts projects by health issues that we're working on. More than 25% of the residents on the Near East Side don't have access to health insurance. And so it tells what IUPUI is doing. We run a powerhouse program around diabetes prevention. We run a fitness zone at the Near East Side Legacy Center that came about as a result of the Super Bowl when we hosted it. We run a student outreach clinic that's 7 different schools from our campus, multidisciplinary, interprofessional. We have a growing places to foster fresh foods that's connected to service learning courses and co-curricular and education, workforce development. I'm not going to go into all of it. You just scroll down and those are the kinds of things that, so we do different stories on a regular basis around a population, a social issue, or a geographic location. All of it comes from Collaboratory and our mapping and my day-to-day sort of other stuff. So I guess what I'm trying to explain to you is that the research studies that I explained earlier, those are institutional research, and I use those to advocate for conversations and changes at this policy level. So those are internal policy decisions. The Collaboratory and others make it more exposing it, right? It's telling the story of impact of our institution. That's the external facing version of things. Does that make sense? I'm pausing because I know we only have a minute and you guys might want to ask questions. I'm happy to stay longer for those of you who want to hang out and ask anything else.
Questions?
I'd love to hear a little bit more about some ways to assess community impact, because that's the place where we struggle the most. And it's not easy to get our arms around classes and student hours and things, but the community impact piece seems to be like the holy grail that I'm struggling with finding it.
So I think that what we care about in terms of community impact from a community engagement lens is whether or not our partnerships are reciprocal and mutually beneficial. That is different than, are we moving the needle on 3rd grade literacy rates, right? And so I first am going to say that I don't do that in isolation. I don't have an expertise in measuring community impact, and it's not even like a program evaluator. So you have enough people at your institution who'd be doing program evaluations specific to their program that they run. So Collaboratory tracks reciprocity and mutual benefit. So we are using it as a way of looking at whether or not our partnerships are reciprocal and mutually beneficial. Other things that I'm working on, so right now my big focus is on K through 12 education engagement. So I am on a hellbent mission to make sure that if faculty are working with the K through 12 sector, what are you doing in getting it into Collaboratory? Second step, once that's complete, which I'm really, really close. And I have everything anywhere from like teacher placement sites to field experiences to summer camps to you name it. You can name a K through 12 or a thing that you do to address education. I can get it into Collaboratory. Then I partner with somebody else on campus that has access to other public data sets that help us better understand. So you're taking, here's what we do, overlay that then with what are the outcomes for those. So for example, we are going to look at, of the 3,000 schools in the state of Indiana, how many of those do I have a relationship with? How many of those are we doing tutoring? How many of them are mentoring? How many of them are college readiness? How many of it is a research project? And do we see, then when I look at those schools that sort of, which ones have the trifecta, do we see different outcomes? So I can then pull their public records of their, free and reduced line, like all those SATs, like you can start to get at, oh, here's all the schools that we are involved with. Here's the one. So I can't necessarily measure impact. We aren't going to make statements of impact. We're not the only person addressing K through 12 education, right? And so I would never say that just because we're there, they have better SAT scores or better literacy scores. But I can be more descriptive about where we are, where we aren't, where are there opportunities for us to be doing more work. And we could look at things in Collaboratory based on, we've been with these schools for the last 10 years versus these are new partnerships, so you can, what are the factors that we think, take the hypothesis testing, right? And sort of look at the data, and we'll do it. So we're doing that now, and we'll do a big community engagement report. It'll look similar to that ArcGIS thing I showed you, that's what we're going to end up with. It'll be more of a slick looking thing, right? And the point of it is to not be the end all be all, but to be a conversation starter with people on campus about what should we be doing to address it. Because the School of Education doesn't know what the School of Science and the School of Engineering are doing in K through 12 education. The education faculty members down the hall don't know each other are doing, much less collectively as an institution. Where do we have relationships in the K through 12? It's bad, like really, really bad. Bad. I'm a large institution, but I'm gonna tell you it's bad everywhere. Does that make sense? So it's not, are we moving the needle? But oh my gosh, I can tell a pretty darn good story about what we are doing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's helpful. It's a little bit challenging without the specific tools, and with a undergraduate institution of 2,400 students, like we have a different level of impact. So so I think it's just maybe being realistic about what we can get from our partners in terms of, do they really feel like our relationships are reciprocal and collaborative? It's going to be more asking them directly, I think.
So I would say from that standpoint, I refused to go ask any community partner, what are you doing with the university? First, I would go in saying, I know you work with such and such faculty member and you do this project and you have this project and you have this project going on. Tell me about what is it like to work with the institution. And by the way, when you say you work with a community partner, which person? You have some of these organizations, you may have a faculty member in public health working with somebody and a person in school science, they're working with different people. So you asking the director of a nonprofit organization what they think about working with the university, that's not the same than the actual person working with a faculty member.
Right.
So measuring community impact from that lens even is so complicated. So complicated. I think it could add nuance, and we will interview partners and the superintendent from the Indianapolis public school system and all those other pieces as part of our story. But it's not, we understand how unrealistic it is to execute an interview protocol or even administer a survey to our partners.
Right.
And my faculty members do not want me to contact their partners.
Right. Yeah, I have that same thing.
Yeah. And by them putting the information in Collaboratory, I have sworn them that I will not contact the partners without letting them know, which is why the faculty promotion and tenure idea is fascinating, because faculty are self-selecting because they see how it benefits them, right? And so we have to think about how does that benefit the community as well. But when faculty are choosing because they want feedback from the partners and they think it's meaningful and that's useful for the institution to hear, I think that's a better approach, as opposed to us just coming out and saying, I'm going to do a partnership study, I'm going to go interview your partners. My faculty are not down for that.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
I have one question. I know I missed it, but I want to know, you're a faculty member, and that's why you're not.
Nope.
So
I've chosen not to go into faculty.
So how do you have access to faculty? Because in some institutions, the worlds are parallel.
Yeah. I used to work in our Center for Service and Learning. That fundamentally shifted in our strategic plan process, and when we took Collaboratory on, our institution created a vice chancellor for community engagement. And because my boss sits at the chancellor's cabinet meeting, there's just fundamentally calling different. I feel like I have the ability to invite myself to a faculty department meeting and go talk to faculty in different ways, right? It takes a different priority. And keep in mind, though, that I'm at the beck and call of whatever the chancellor's priorities are. It doesn't matter what the community engagement world says and thinks. It's if the university is doing an economic impact study, I pivot, like, okay, we're going to go talk about economic impact, right? If one of our schools is going up for accreditation, they're like, I need evidence of partnerships for my accrediting body, and I pull it up. I do it. So it's never... The information I'm doing and what I'm doing is never to benefit me and community. I always get my lens in there, right? Like I always ask the question from the lens that we care about, but it tends to not be me driving it. And no, I have my Ph.D. and I taught for 3 years prior to going into a staff role. I learned a lot about faculty. My Ph.D. is in higher ed administration, and I studied faculty work so I went into graduating a PhD with my eyes wide open to what faculty work really looked like. I know way too much about promotion and tenure that I knew I could only make a difference, not by creating scholarship and journal articles, but by actually affecting change at my institution. And I just, that's my drive. So I'm a 12-month staff appointment. That there are about 6 of me on campuses that we know of. We call ourselves the unicorns, where we're not like in an institutional research or assessment office, but we're in like this, like we have a foot in community engagement and a foot in assessment, but we care about community engagement. And I've shared my position description lots of times. I'm happy to share it. I could advocate. My job is about raising money for the institution. So at the end of the day, if you don't think that tracking where you're doing partnership work and where you have expertise, I should all be about money. I can tell you what we're doing around K through 12 education. Does anybody want to go write a grant to improve access to higher education through K through 12? I have all the evidence of where you are, where are the gaps, and how you can build a strategy to improve that. It's a gold mine of money, in my opinion.
How is this differ from like the digital commons?
No other system on my campus names a community partner, organization, population, agency, or entity in a systematic way that we do.
But is digital commons similar?
From my understanding, digital commons is a thing that pulls a faculty member's areas of expertise based on their abstracts, books, and so it's only based on their scholarship. It's not based upon their engagement, and it's only based on whether or not a faculty member actually documents who they worked with. So it just never has. We don't systematically ask faculty to tell us who they work with and how they partner with the community in any other way that I know of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the missing puzzle.
It's very fascinating. We're very interested in this. We're thinking about.
Sorry, my dog. Anyway, okay, sorry. It's nuts. There's a delivery person here that I may actually have to go answer because my husband.
I find it really fascinating. I'd like to talk more about it at some point, but not today, but at some point.
Yes.
We're, from an institutional standpoint, this is something that we've been very interested in doing from the center. We're the Center for Community Engagement. So just trying to get a sense.
Look at that package.
Yeah, I have a chair being delivered, so I may have to end it because my dog's going nuts. Now they're calling me and my husband's gone.
Okay.
I will say this. Will let Liz know. I would be happy to do a demo of it at any point in time for all of you, either as a group or separately. I do them all the time. So I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry, guys. Sorry to run.
Thank you so much, Kristin. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's go.
Let's go home.
Wow, that was cool. I mean, that is cool.
Texted Daniel Tomei,
Yeah, I saw that.
and he did a demo with her like 2 weeks ago for 2 hours on Collaboratory.
Yeah.
Because he's thinking, like if they do anything, because he's, he's building everything there. Nothing's done yet.
Yeah.
He's building it. So he wants to start doing assessment and stuff from the start because they don't have anything yet, right? So what's the perfect time to do it rather than trying to backtrack and build it into the program you're building?
Right.
And so that's one of the systems that he's looking at right now.
IUPUI.
She didn't give him pricing when she did it though.
No.
No,
IUPUI.
like that's what they do.
I mean,
They do
it's
that.
just,
That's what they're known for.
they're known for assessment, but it's also we're like a community college next to IUPUI.
Yeah.
But which should mean that we're smaller and I don't know if it matters, but being smaller, which should be cheaper.
Yeah.
It's just not like we're multiple campuses or anything
Right.
like that.
Like we're one campus. Yeah, we'll see.
But I like that idea because this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the council being a
Yeah.
council